So good evening. I just first of all want to thank the Lannan Foundation and Jordan for this extraordinary opportunity. Any chance to talk to Boots Riley? Like I told Boots, I would walk across the country. I'd ride my bike maybe. The last time we were actually in public conversation was at UCLA on the night of the midterm elections last November. And so of course, here we are on the anniversary of 9/11, the anniversary of the attacks on the World Trade Center, and Booth may have a story to share about that, by the way. Also, the anniversary of the US overthrow of Salvador Allende in Chile, and we're also having this conversation in New Mexico, which is one of the many ground zeros in what, for Native peoples, have been 5 centuries of 9/11s. And I want to acknowledge that we're on Native soil right now. And I do hope that tonight, in our conversation, and just all of you here today will recognize and acknowledge the many millions gone as a consequence of ongoing terrorism. So let me begin, by reading an excerpt from a poem. Your thumbs may be opposable. I'm opposed to being under them. And your communication may be complex, colored, coded, but the closer the ocean gets to cauldron, the more specious your classification be. If you love your species more than your species, you're out of order. Now, these 2 stanzas are from Evie Shockley's poem, Topsy's Notes on Taxonomy, from her amazing book, Semi-Automatic. And I start with it because this was actually the epigraph to the piece I wrote on Boots's amazing masterwork, Sorry to Bother You, for Boston Review, where my editor's like, you can't use that, and just cut it. So I'm giving it to you tonight because for me, the poem perfectly encapsulates the film's most fundamental message. Now, true, the ocean cauldron refers to the transatlantic kidnapping and transport of Africans, also known as the Mafa, or the catastrophe, but in many ways, the global neoliberal order is the contemporary cauldron. Racial classification is still with us, not merely as counterfeit categories of difference, but as markers of hierarchy, the dividing line between official humanity and its others. In both worlds, cash rules everything, including thought. But Shockley's fictional character Topsy overturns this logic and exposes its contradictions. If you love your species more than your species, you're out of order. This is precisely the lesson of Sorry to Bother You. Cash Green and his would-be comrades concluded that this money-loving system was out of order, and they set out to make a new order, to level it up. The poem not only captures the themes of the film, but for me, it really captures Boots's entire life and work. Boots Riley is one of the most consequential artists and intellectuals of our generation, period. And that's saying a lot, because I know that because there is no shortage of remarkable thinkers, creators, and activists. But as far as I'm concerned, there's no one like Boots who can do it all and do it well, who can write, rap, produce, direct, critique, debate, organize, and crack you up to the point of your back of the head is cramping. And rare is the artist intellectual today with deep links to radical social movements, with roots in aggrieved communities, who is not afraid of the people. Here, I think of ancestors like Amiri Baraka, Jane Cortez, Toni Cade Bambara, Audre Lorde, and those who are still with us, like Sonia Sanchez, Angela Davis, Tom Morello, Jake Fauer, the artists associated with Decolonize This Place, and others. Boots isn't in it to be famous. He called himself a revolutionary when it was not a popular thing to do, and it's still not. And he walked the talk. He organized with the Progressive Labor Party and its offshoot, the International Committee Against Racism, protested police violence, participated in the founding convention of the Black Radical Congress in 1998, became a fixture at Occupy Oakland. He organized migrant farm workers in Central California, worked in telemarketing, loaded packages onto UPS planes, co-founded the Young Comrades, whose members frequently appeared before Oakland City's council to protest police harassment and the city's anti-cruising laws. He did all of this as he founded and performed as the lead rapper and producer of The Coup, which he created in 1991 with a couple of fellow UPS workers. That same year, he helped found the Mau Mau Rhythm Collective, whose explicit political agenda led them to do benefits and support work for groups like the Women's Economic Agenda Project, Cop Watch, the Campaign to Free Geronimo Pratt, among many other things. The Coup's debut CD, Kill My Landlord, 1993, really put them on the map. And this is when I was hooked, I have to say. I'd never heard anything like it, you know, and I'm a little older than Boots. Actually quite a bit older, now I think about it. I'm an old person. Okay, I can deal with my crisis right now. But I played that record, that CD so much that my 3-year-old daughter could recite all the lyrics to Dig It. This was followed by Genocide and Juice, which was brilliant for so many reasons, least of which for the way he spun lyrics that exposed and satirized the operations of power in songs like Fat Cats, Bigger Fish, and Pimps. And then there was Steal This Album, whose powerful single, Me and Jesus, the Pimp in a 79 Granada Last Night, not only displayed Boots' brilliant knack for storytelling, but inspired Monique Morris's novel, Too Beautiful for Words. Soon followed by the controversial Party Music, which incidentally, for lots of reasons, it's the first time I'd ever heard authentic character acting on a hip-hop record. You just go back and listen to it. Pick a Bigger Weapon, and Sorry to Bother You, which was going to be the soundtrack to the film, which came out in 2012, and of course the film was released, finally completed, in 6 years later. And he kept his hands in many projects, including the Street Sweeper Social Club, a band he formed with Rage Against the Machine's Tom Morello. When Riley wasn't moving boxes, moving masses, he studied film at San Francisco State University's School of Cinema, wrote screenplays, and began a long journey that led to Sorry to Bother You and various film and television projects that are in the works now. So we're here tonight not just to celebrate a remarkable career, we could do that, but to talk about the role of art and artists in fighting for our lives and our futures. Boots is an artist and a thinker we desperately need now, not only because fascism is on the rise here and around the world, not only because more and more working people live in a state of precarity and debt while the rich get richer, not only because Black, brown, and Native peoples continue to confront old and new forms of genocide, dispossession, statelessness, and unfreedom, not only because the bodily integrity and autonomy and safety of cisgender women, queer, and trans people are threatened every day, not only because we face the existential threat of the end of life as we all know it, but because we don't have good answers. We don't have effective responses. We don't necessarily have powerful movements. And he has produced a body of work that reveals the crises and contradictions and consequences of capitalism, lays bare its operations and the workings of power, and then proposes, imagines, demands good answers. Boots has always understood that dark times are also revolutionary times. He knew this, having been raised by committed revolutionaries, living and fighting in and with communities for whom times were always pretty dark. He made art with the intention of finding answers, inspiring movement. As he put it, when he accepted the Independent Spirit Award, the struggle we need is one that gives us a different system. We need real democracy, and that's democracy of the economy. Some people call that communism. I don't care what you call it. You can call it cupcakes. The people should control the wealth that they create with their labor. But he understands that art by itself doesn't make it happen. Movements do, people in struggle do. Conscious masses in motion is a force. Or to quote from one of my favorite cuts by the coup, if you want that door to open, you're gonna have to use your shoulder. Please join me in welcoming Boots Riley.
What's up?
Yeah. Okay, so there are people there. I couldn't see anything. It was just darkness. Okay, well, let's begin at the beginning. I mean, we have a lot to talk about tonight. We've got 75 minutes, and the counter's about to start. So before we get into the questions about art in politics and what it is to be done, let's begin by talking about your story. I mean, I deliberately left a lot of biographical information out of my introduction because I really want you to share your story. In other words, how did you become an artist and a revolutionary? Talk about your family, your upbringing, your influences.
Okay. So when I was 12, I wanted to be Prince. You know, I wanted to be everything that he's, besides the good music, it was clear to me that he was doing something important. That's what I knew. And I wanted to be him, but I didn't want to practice as much as it would have taken to be him. A couple years later, when I was 14, a youth organizer pulled up in front of my house with a van full of 14-year-old girls. And he was like, "Hey, do you want to go to the beach?" And the answer was, as a 14-year-old boy, do I want to go to the beach in a van full of 14-year-old girls? Yes. And he's like, "Cool. Well, we're going to go to the Watsonville Cannery Workers strike first, and then we're going to go to the beach."
And you're living in the Bay Area?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this was in Oakland. And so I went, and when I got in the van, these girls, they knew about what was happening in the world, right? They could talk about the things that I kind of ignored a little bit from the news, and they had opinions on them, and you know, it was clear that they had a construct to add all this information into, and I just wanted to, you know, I wanted some of that. I wanted to be, and so it, you know, what they had was, they had the idea that they could change things. So this information became important. Well, I went from there to get involved with that summer with a summer project in which we helped out farm workers in the Central California Valley to organize what they would call the Anti-Racist Farm Workers Union. And so I joined Progressive Labor Party, which was a radical organization, a communist organization. And during that period in my life, I kind of had shunned the period before, which was, I want to be a musician because I want to, you know, and I looked at that as being an individualist endeavor, right? But it was years later after that I realized it was part of the same thing. Because now, once I joined an organization, I felt like I could have an effect on the world. Whereas when you're, you know, most of us are watching TV, in life, we're already told that we aren't shit, that we don't mean anything. But the people that are important are on TV. We should pay attention to them. And so it's natural to want your life to mean something, right? And so I realized that, you know, I felt that my life was meaning something because I could be part of something that would change the way things are. And that experience that summer, and I did it for a few summers in a row, but that experience that summer was very formative because this was led by former students from Mexico City in '68 who had come up, joined Cesar Chavez's group and broke off from them because they were more radical. But they came with a revolutionary vision, which said, look, we're going to organize a militant labor movement here, and it's going to grow, and here are the steps, and that's going to turn into a revolutionary movement.
Right. So now where was your parents in this? Because your dad has a history.
So so my father got involved with the NAACP when he was 12 in Durham, North Carolina, and then soon after that joined CORE and was part of organizing some of the first sit-ins that happened in North Carolina. He wasn't there, but he was part of organizing them. And CORE moved him to San Francisco. He then got involved in the San Francisco State Strike, which is of 1968, which is the one that created School of Ethnic Studies, the first one in the U.S., and got involved in more radical organizations, got involved in SDS and Progressive Labor Party. So, but by the time I was 8, as happens, him and he met my mother at San Francisco State, and they moved to Detroit, and where he moved to Chicago, then to Detroit, where he was the full-time organizer for Progressive Labor Party, until we moved to Oakland when I was 6. But by that point, they were burnt out. He went back to, as happens in those organizations, splits happen and people fight each other and all those sorts of things. And he went back to school and became a lawyer. By the time when I turned 8, he had become a lawyer. And so I knew that they had been involved in something that was rebellious. I didn't know, you're too young to, I remember him coming home with his ribs bandaged up when I was 5. And I was asking, well, what happened? And he just said matter-of-factly, we went to Chicago to fight the Klan. And one of them blindsided me with a 2x4. And that was that, just on with the day, like it was regular. And so I knew that they had been involved. So when I then later got involved with the same organization, which he wasn't in, which was maybe even stickier than being involved with some new thing, I knew that at the very least I didn't have parents that would be like, what are you doing? Right. Don't be involved in that. His main complaint, because when he found out I did join Progressive Labor Party, his main complaint was like he called them in for a meeting and said that they were being liberal because I don't even read, and he wouldn't have let me in the party when he was in. So that was his main complaint, was that I wasn't radical enough. So
okay, I don't want to leave this because I actually have another question, but so at what point did he come to terms with the fact that, you were an authentic, genuine revolutionary? Oh,
I think it was when he had, like I said, so my father has gotten back involved in, and has, like, for instance, he's more involved in Black Lives Matter than I am, and he's the lawyer that gets everybody off for every radical protest. But this was a period where, he was not as involved in stuff. And, he had this trip plan where we were going to rent an RV, and me and my brother and him alone, we were going to go up to Canada to the World's Fair or something like that. And I was like, I'm not going. I'm going to the farm workers. And and I think he just saw that as like an adult choice.
Yes, Steve.
Yeah.
Well, you have an interesting background as a kid. I mean, most of us know about you with the coup, Fully Formed, in music, but you also have a theater background going back to then. I know you hung out with the Oakland Ensemble Theater, and your grandmother used to run it. Yeah.
So my grandmother ran the Oakland Ensemble Theater in the 70s and 80s. And I didn't really see that as something cool. Because a lot of times plays are people on the couch arguing with each other, the sound of a door slamming when they walk out. But one day they did Flash Gordon, and it was like in the round, and they had people like sliding on wires and something trying to look like a laser, and I was just blown away. I was like, this is it opened my mind up. So
how old were you? Probably.
I must have only been 9 or 10, and so then later, when I did go do the farm work, this was in Delano and McFarland, where there had already been a legacy of Teatro Campesino, and we had heard about that. So we were trying to do like little plays that were very corny and on the nose, and but just the idea that you could do theater for that reason, stuck to me. And so at the same time, I was writing plays at school, and I joined the Black Repertory Theater, which was based in Berkeley, and there would be, and I don't even think we actually put on our plays. We worked on plays for a long time, and we helped, like these one-person shows that would come in. The one person that would come in all the time was Roger Guinevere Smith doing Frederick Douglass.
Right.
And so I think all of that led me to think, well, maybe I could do theater. But this is at the Black Repertory Theater. The theater was like as big as this stage, maybe. And so I was like, oh, it's going to be hard to bring the Revolution 40 people at a time. And that was around the time when Spike Lee was getting big.
Right.
And I looked at and there's a big theatrical quality to definitely to what he does, and not to mention that he's a young black man doing it. So, I was like, wow, I could actually maybe do it with film. And there was the story of him doing it with $100,000, the first film. And so it seemed like something that could be done. So I went to San Francisco State for film.
So you were thinking about this in high school, to go to film school in college.
Yeah, I mean, I think also because I was in high school getting radicalized, you're like figuring out, how can we bring the fire? How can this, there's no like measuredness or patience about it. Like, you're frustrated with everybody, that's doing it. Like, why is this not out there more? Why are we not reaching more people? And so I was thinking of ways that, these ideas could get out there in a large way. And mind you, this is the 80s, and I wasn't finding this politic at all in any popular culture. The closest thing I got was Public Enemy. And and that was obviously very inspiring as well. So, and at the same time, I'm doing music. So, went to school, and then we happened to be where every record label needed a group from, because corporations are stupid. They like, if somebody has a green jacket and they have a hit record, they'll be like, put everybody in green jackets, right? And so, because there had been a few groups with hits from Oakland, every record label was like, we need a group from Oakland. And we just happened to be out there at the time, using skills that I had learned from organizing, which was wheat pasting posters, just everywhere. Like, nobody had heard the coup, but everybody had seen the poster. And they were like, what the hell is the coup? Like, what? And so when we did put a tape out, there just happened to be one week where we had sold a lot of tapes, and that was the week that the record label came through. Right.
So who came up with the name?
Me.
So when you formed the coup, actually, I'm gonna jump to this other question because I'm really interested in this issue, because the late 1980s was an interesting, and the early 90s was an interesting period for hip hop. It's at least a year plus.
Well, I also want to put this into context, because I can't really see out there, so I don't know the ages of everybody.
Yeah, I know, I can't see anything.
But it was, okay, so we, in like, during this time, it was like 89, 90, 91, and there'd be like a well-known police killing, right? And this is before Rodney King and everything. We'd flyer a neighborhood and work on it for 2 weeks to have a demonstration in front of the police station, and there'd be 4 people that came. Right? One of them being related to one of us that threw it. And we'd have meetings afterward trying to figure out how to sum it up as a victory, right? And that was where like movements felt like they were at. I don't know if that was true. You know, obviously there were other things going on in New York and things like that, but that was where things were at. So for me, getting these ideas out there on a bigger platform was, in my mind, the only way that to build a movement. Yeah.
Well, before we get to that, just one small thing. So the 1980s were interesting because there were so many left organizations. It's like flowered. I mean, but of course, there are no big organizations. A lot of small. I mean, if you just start doing the alphabet, this, you know, PLP, CWP, RLP.
And what I didn't understand at the time was this was really so the people that were there maybe when you and I got involved, they were the folks that still hung on. Right? There was the beginning of the New Left in the 60s, you had various people come in that were maybe, I don't know, were average everyday people getting more involved in things. And with all the splits and everything that happened, the folks that were still around were the hardcore, the hardline folks.
Right.
And I didn't understand that. And so, but there was a different tenor to what was happening. And I believe maybe a lot of those folks weren't the best at social interaction. Right? And
I could attest to that.
Yeah. and they were holding on to an era that had passed.
Right.
Lucky for me that I had got into that to see some of that. Right? And so those ways of being, even though there were more groups, they were way less visible than maybe somebody would be now, trying to do campaigns and things like that.
Well, I think it's pretty interesting coincidence that the late 80s, early 90s, we see, you know, hip hop's over a decade old. And of course, even longer than that, given some stuff that you've said about, you know, its roots in Hambone and street rhymes. But that's the moment when there's so many really more explicit political artists. Like you mentioned Public Enemy, X-Clan, Too Black, Too Strong. There's all these organizations, all these artists. But one of the differences is that a lot of these artists don't necessarily have connections to social movements, to organizations, with some exceptions. You all formed the Mau Mau Rhythm Collective, which is a way of connecting the music and art to the streets. One, why did you do that? And what were you trying to accomplish? And what did you learn about linking, you know, creative production?
So really what we created the Mau Mau Rhythm Collective, and it was a retreat. It was us like trying to not organize. Like there were a few of us, like a bunch of folks that even though I was only 19 and 20, by this time I'd been involved in stuff for 4 or 5 years, which is a lifetime at that age. And a lot of us were kind of burnt out, and we were like, we're gonna make a cultural organization, right? And that was, when we started it, it was just gonna be a cultural organization that had radical ideas. So there were, you know, I was from PLP, there were some other people from AAPRP and All African People's Socialist Party, which is also known as Uhuru, and some other children of Panthers that were involved.
And AAPRP is All African People's Revolutionary Party, for people who don't know.
And so these were people that had been burnt out from those organizations, and we were all all artists. So we were like, we just want to do art. This was our sort of way. And we started passing out flyers and getting people involved in events. Pretty soon, we had 500 people in the organization. And some of these were high school students who were like, okay, because we kept doing these shows that were called hip-hop edutainment concerts, and which we stole edutainment from KRS-One and all that. But some of the folks involved were like, okay, we're gonna keep talking about police brutality, and we're doing all these, what are we gonna do? Right. Are we just gonna throw shows? And so it was some of the new people that came along that kind of snapped us back into reality. And then it became kind of then we started connecting, reaching out to organizations and being part of campaigns and figuring out how we could use that art with the campaign, because what I also started noticing was we had that period where there was Public Enemy, X-Clan, a few Poor Righteous Teachers, a few other groups, and there was a backlash to it because they put this art out there that talked about problems and made you feel like the music was the answer. Right. And I think, and there was even a dress code to part of it. We all had like the African medallions and all of that. But I think what happened for a lot of people, how they would have termed it is, we want some music that's more quote unquote real. And how that kind of, the quote unquote real music got denigrated by some writers was that, oh, this is just gangster stuff, right? But what they were talking about is that this music that was supposedly somehow conscious was not connected to anything material that could change anyone's lives. So you could have the medallion on, you could listen to Fight the Power, but you're gonna go home and you don't have any food in the refrigerator, right? And so people started kind of rebelling against that, because this song over here, though, it says you can sell this rock and make $10. And it was true. It was connected to something material, a material movement. And and so that ends up being the problem with art that, even wants to be radical, is if there is no movement for people to do anything with, then it can cause a backlash of other kind of art that is connected to a more right-wing movement.
Right. Now, did you all talk about this then?
Yeah, we had a, matter of fact, I was at San Francisco State, and I was much smaller than I am now. And somehow we would get on, and my friend Dave was also small like me, but somehow we would get to be Chuck D's security when he would come to speak at San Francisco State. And we would just be his security so we could argue with him in the van. And
what would you talk about?
We talk about the need for, again, we would jump to the need for a revolution. And we'd say, well, we need a revolution where the working class overthrows the ruling class. And Chuck's viewpoint was, he would kind of not really answer, but he'd say, like, you're not ready for that. But what's funny is that then years later, when the coup came out on the national stage, I saw him for the first time, and this was years later. My hairstyle had changed. I grew facial hair and all that, and he was like, San Francisco State, because we had just hounded him so much, and but and there was no reason to argue with Chuck D except for we want to talk to Chuck D.
Right. But but I really want you to talk a little bit about, the process of having these debates, looking at the political situation, coming out of 4 or 5 years of organizing, and then committing to making this extraordinary music, where musically, what the coup was able to do was so sophisticated and grounded and very much connected to people. I mean, if you take the lyrics out,
Yeah.
connected to people. But then you wrote these lyrics that are not preachy, they're not trying to beat you down. They are both narratives of everyday life, but also these like hilarious exposés of things that actually are not always funny, you know? So how much of that preparation led you to that, and what were you trying to accomplish in creating that work, that early work?
Well, I'll say part of it is this, that, like I said, when I started getting radicalized, there were a lot of old school organizers around. Some of these folks were probably in their 70s, in the 80s, right? And you know, like old Jewish dudes from New York, like Milt and Mort and all that. And then old British dudes that had been involved with minor stuff. And like, I remember like this old British dude would be like, you know, like, how are you gonna get a man to go on strike with you if you can't have a pint with him, right? And then, and then like the old Jewish communists would always be telling, it would just be like you think they're telling jokes, but they're just talking about what they think, right? And really what it is that it's that comedy, tragedy, and analysis are all kind of the same thing, right? Because, you know, if I'm gonna tell you my analysis of how capitalism works, I'm gonna leave out certain details and talk about the important contradictions that I think are there. And these are the contradictions we need to pay attention to, right? So I'm doing some editing and I'm heightening that contradiction for you. That's exactly what you do, you know, in a dramatic work, and it's exactly what comedy is and what tragedy is. And I didn't think, this is stuff that I kind of came up with years later, so I never really thought about it in that way as I was doing it. But I think part of my approach was because I did have an analysis that told me that there is a way to change things. That changed what I wanted to say to people, right? So a lot of the groups that were considered political, like some of them are my friends, so, but they've heard me say this before. But a lot of the folks that came out around the same time that are considered political, they were very much about being angry, right? And I knew from the organizing that I'd done that that's not the thing that makes people get involved with things, right? That's something that makes people feel like there's nothing they can do, right? And that this is just, they can express themselves. So my analysis of what it was going to take, what kind of movement we needed to build, changed how I came at people. And then other folks had ideas that, you know, it was simply a behavior problem. So they have songs like, you know, telling people to change their attitude, change how they act, get serious, blah, blah, blah. And some of them are celebrated songs, right? And so, but my thing was always like, this is what's wrong, we could change it, let's go do it. And also, you already agree with me.
Right.
And so that, and so that's always been the thing. I've never tried to make something where I'm, you know, opening you up to some new world. If that happens, cool, but I think that the ideas that we need to act upon are ones that are so much a part of just being a human being, that if you can express them in a certain way. So our first album was very much a pamphlet on tape. Like, I think, you know, like I was really excited to do it. And so a lot of my stuff was like name checking, you know, Che Guevara, Mao Zedong, you know, showing that I knew this about that movement or whatever.
Right.
And I realized just from also touring afterward, like how much it was, some of it was effective, but how much it wasn't effective. And I realized all that I was doing with that was gathering people around that already agreed with me. And so I started taking the tact of, like, for instance, I think since the first album, in that 20-something years, I've only used the word capitalism one time. And I've only used, I've used the word communist once. And the point is that I'm trying to get to how we interact with the system and what that journey is as we not only interact with the system but figure out how to change it.
Right.
And so that I think that's why it ends up not feeling quote unquote preachy.
Right. Yeah, you also come from a different background. I mean, you think about what it means to have started out as an organizer and then moved into the art, but always having a foot in the art. I mean, there's all these examples, really bad examples, I won't name names, of activists, intellectuals who try to sort of say, well, hip hop is a way to maybe reach the masses, and they make these really bad records because that's not their thing. As opposed to, I'm not naming anybody. But in your case, you come out of an organizer's background, and you all succeed in being able to bring along people who are not necessarily trying to listen to so-called conscious rap. I mean,
well, you have
the
to.
Bay Area has. I mean, in the Bay Area, you have a following. You had a following of people who just love the coup.
Yeah, I think part of it is you have to respect the art that you're doing, right? Like, I can't just decide I want to, that I want to get computer scientists to become revolutionary and teach a class at school about it without figuring, without doing some study and really loving what I'm doing, right? And so, and I think I went through that period too. Like, I became more of an artist, I think, after the first album. I knew some of this idea, but I think you have to master your art. You have to master what you're doing. You have to know the language you're speaking, right? And so I think that's a big part of it. But I think it's also connected to the feeling that I want to give, right? Like, so I don't want to give a feeling of dread. I don't think that is the feeling that says we're going to transform the system. I wanted to give get emotional responses that have to do with hopefulness. So that has to do with why some of the songs are, might seem comedic.
Right.
And it has to do with why some of the songs are dance songs. We were told early on that we didn't make political music. Somebody said that in some review.
Oh, really?
Right, yeah. Because we weren't sounding like the Bomb Squad.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Interesting.
And who I love, but that was a certain kind of sound that was chaos, and it said a particular thing, and I was wanting to capture other things that I thought were revolutionary, that I thought were things that inspired people to be involved in organizations. And some of that is, has to do with the signifying of sounds that people already see as their own, right? And they see as belonging to the community, right? So, for instance, which made us have less traction with critics at first, because, like, if you want to look at, I remember in one issue of The Source, which is the hip hop magazine, they called Ice Cube's album Death Certificate Gangster Rap, right? And they called, I think it was like Black Sheep or something, was conscious.
Right.
But Black Sheep was talking about pimping women.
Right.
And,
Death
but they
Certificate
used jazz samples.
Right.
They used jazz samples, which is thought of intellectually superior. And Ice Cube used the blues aesthetic,
Right.
the blues and funk aesthetic. That signified the idea that certain people were going to be listening to this, that black people
Right.
were going to be listening to this.
Right.
The truth is with all this music, you know, anything you sell in the U.S., it's mainly white people that are consuming it.
Exactly.
But the perception was that was gangster because it had a blues aesthetic to it, and so because our music didn't always fit into the category of being where the music sounded like it was trying to be highbrow.
Right.
It wasn't recognized at first. It took a
Right.
few albums for it to
Well,
get
I know the
recognized.
Death Certificate was Ice Cube's attempt. That was his master work. That was the thing that he felt like he broke out of what he was doing before and didn't get the respect. I mean, and so much that's an amazing record.
Oh, yeah.
So let's step back for a second, and I'd really like to hear from you just your thoughts about the impact that your art has had on movements and on people, and I mean really pull the camera back to include like Sorry to Bother You, for example, or some of the other works that you did. Or, by the way, tell Homeland Security where the bomb is available for sale after this event. Make sure you don't leave this place without a copy. Really, seriously, because that's also another really important work of art. But just what impact has your art had on people?
Well, I mean, so this is a question that I'm always asking myself, and I've gone through various bouts of depression and wondering whether, at different times in my life, wondering whether because I originally thought I was just going to do 2 albums and be out and back to organizing. Mm-hmm. And matter of fact, I quit after the second album when we did the Young Comrades. But anyway, so I, with Sorry to Bother You, for instance, but I get inspired when people tell me. When I was involved in the Occupy Oakland movement, a lot of the people that were coming there were like, look, I got involved with stuff because your music led me to other organizations, to try to find organizations that I could be involved in. Mm-hmm. Or look, we had this all-night poster-making party, and everybody wanted to leave, but we turned on your music, and it, mm-hmm. made us think that this was the thing to do. Or, there was a First Nations tribe in Canada that I guess had a shootout with police. And this, I don't know when this was, because the chief had come up to me at a concert we did, and he told me the story that they had the shootout that lasted for days, and that they all got cleared of everything. And he said, we were scared for our lives, and we had the Coups, Genocide and Juice playing on loop to make us feel like we were doing the right thing. There a group of theater workers in Utah hit me up saying that they were forming a union after seeing Sorry to Bother You. This was in Salt Lake City. They formed a union. In Baltimore, there was, and I can't remember exactly, but somebody came and told me the story that where their job was unorganized, and they had this big campaign that took, some time to where they all had a meeting, and they were going to have the vote on whether to have the union or not, and they were wondering what was going to happen, and right before it was time to put hands up or whatever, or I don't know what they did, somebody yelled, Equisapiens, let's be out. And then, and you know, so, and then I see video of demonstrations where people are playing cool music and, you know, doing art that may be inspired by it and using those in demonstrations. So that tells me that it's going in the right direction. You know, I think sometimes I do get, there is some frustration because when I'll tour around sometimes, and inevitably people will say, okay, I want to do something. What organization should I join? Mm-hmm. And sometimes there is nobody around them in that area. You know, they have to go online or something like that, and or I'm not just knowledgeable enough about what's going on in that area to do that. So there is some disconnect between that. But I've had a lot of stories of people coming and saying that they've gotten involved in radical politics because of my music. So that's you know, I don't have any way to measure that, but yeah, I often think, because before I got into music, because I did have this idea that I thought that the folks that were in radical organizations, a lot of them were pretty antisocial, and they, you know, they'd be in arguments that they didn't need to be in, and, you know, not really know how to communicate this idea or that idea. And I thought of my art as being one-on-one communication. Right. I don't think it's that anymore because it takes practice, but I thought of that as my art, and I thought of that as a worthwhile endeavor to figure out how to do that in you know, in the service of building a movement. Mm-hmm. And I thought that you know, because of that, you know, there were little things that told me that I had certain skills that would lead to good to being a good community organizer. So I always am wondering, like, am I doing the right thing? Am I, you know, and so those stories help me some, but I do think there is still a big gap between connecting art to social movements, right? There are people that go see Sorry to Bother You and wonder, like, how am I gonna get involved in something? Right. And, you know, there's nothing for, you know, in some cases there is something, but so we need, you know, I think, and I think those social movements getting bigger, radical, they're becoming a radical, militant labor movement with, you know, that is explicit in its radical vision, one that can withhold labor as a tactic for a larger, that will then turn into an even more radical movement. I think that will create the artists that we need. Right. You know.
Right. Speaking of which, so in terms of creating the artists we need, I want to read a quote from
I want to ask you a couple questions because when I think about this, you know, there's some with my artistic career, there's some failures and some successes. And I will say that I think Sorry to Bother You is my biggest hit success, you know, where people are getting this idea in a big way. But but a lot of my ideas about what can be have come from reading people like you and books that you've read. Like, I didn't know about Harry Haywood till I read, you know, till I read Race Rebels. I mean, not Harry Haywood. Yeah, Harry Haywood. Yeah, I mentioned and I didn't, you know, many of these things kind of tie what's going on to what could be, and especially, you know, working for me in the Black community, and there being times when people are very, where other organizers that may come from different political backgrounds, you know, definitely poo-poo the, you know, class analysis and
Right.
things, right?
So
So
my
those were very important to me in political arguments with people and kind of, confirming that maybe I'm on the right path. Now, with all of this movement that's been happening that over the past century, I'd be interested to know, like, where are times where artists that either have come out from those movements or been affected by those movements have, like, made that big connection.
Right.
They made the revolutionary pop song or the radical this or that, and it had some effect in helping to build a movement.
Right. That's a really good question. It's a hard question because, the moments that we tend to hold up, which I think are worth holding up, like in the 1960s and 70s, for example, if you think about the Black Arts Movement, unlike the Harlem Renaissance, the artists who came out of the Black Arts Movement in Chicago and New York and the Bay Area and LA, in Atlanta, Detroit, they made a commitment to move creative work from downtown venues, from the high art areas into community venues. I mean, people like, Marie Evans and Sonia Sanchez and Baraka, Hakeem Adabudi, these were folks who were not trying to make a lot of money. They gave up a lot. I mean, Baraka could be rich. When he came out of the Village, he had an Obie Award. He could have done whatever he wanted to do, but made a certain choice to move into spaces, community centers, church basements, and musicians who are making all this really creative music, challenging music, avant-garde music, were doing so in like parks. Like LA is a really good example where Horace Tapscott and the Black Arts sort of explosion there in the 1960s, you had more artists per square mile in Watts in the 1960s after the rebellion than maybe any other place in all of the United States. And these were sculptors and painters and musicians doing challenging work with and in the community. And the funny thing is that two things happened. One, you get some of these projects were supported by federal money, war on poverty money, and more federal money was used by supporting the FBI to destroy these organizations. So you have like two sides of the federal government, basically, one waging a certain kind of soft war and one waging a hard war. But those are moments, I think, that where you really do see a connection. But these were also movements that had like real flaws. Flaws in terms of gender politics, flaws in terms of, in some respects, class politics. But it's to be expected. I wouldn't beat them down for that. I mean, that's part of what, part of the lessons of those struggles. So for me, there are moments, but I can't speak to any kind of moment in which I would say they were like, what we think of as like major success. I mean, the irony is that those moments of connection between mass movements, grassroots movements, local movements, and art making also end up being appropriated by Hollywood studios. That's the moment when black is hot, or brown is hot. And then we end up, maybe not us in this room, but we end up being lulled into believing that this is a great time for black people on television because we see more faces. The great time would be, and this goes back to the question I'm going to ask you, is how do we move from representation to struggle to movement? And I'm going to read this. So you gave this amazing, powerful gauntlet-throwing speech at the San Francisco International Film Festival, and you said, even when we make films that attempt to address the problems that are around us, we don't have anywhere to point people. So a lot of times it ends at, here's the problem, the end. And that's because we as artists haven't been connected to movements that are looking at how we actually change things and where power lies. That's changing now. So my question is, that's changing now. Can you elaborate? What needs to be done? What is changing now?
Well, I think what's one thing that's changing now is our our collective perception of where each other are at, right? In the sense that you have even right-wing think tanks coming out with polls showing that 51% of millennials want a socialist society in the U.S.
Right.
And that was like with 4,000 people. You have like the not Gallup, something else starts with a G. Huh?
Okay.
One of those big polls. Anyway, that's like 43% of all ages want a socialist society, right? You have strikes, people doing wildcat strikes,
Right.
like the teachers are just on
Teachers,
it.
exactly.
And you have, I mean, one of the things is when I was involved in Occupy Oakland, I sometimes became the de facto spokesperson just because whatever. And they'd be like, what do you think about all these black blocs destroying property and busting windows or whatever? And the thing that I was asked not to say, which I could probably say now, is that it was the nurses, right? The nurses are fucking fired up, right? And they're putting posters on windows and fucking shit up. And you know, like there's a radicalness and there's a willingness towards militancy that's happening. The organization overall is not there, but I think not only are these things happening, because we could point to waves that happen over the past, decades where that happens, but this is one where right now the media can't even wipe over it and say that it doesn't exist. I already knew that people were way more radical than what the media told us. But when we had our album cover for Party Music, it was before 9/11, and it had the World Trade Center blowing up. And it was a big controversy, not because of the album cover, but because I used that time to point out that the U.S. had just been found guilty of orchestrating the killing of 19,000 people in Central America. So that's why they couldn't use the World Court.
So I think make sure people understand this, that the picture was taken before 9/11.
Yeah.
So do you understand that, right? Okay, that's really important.
Yeah.
And then they end up holding
Yeah,
up
and
the
so
album.
then I ended up, but anyway, so we had also got this tour that was not our tour. That was not the Coos tour, so it wasn't gonna be the Coos fans. It was actually an MTV sponsored tour for this group called the Executioners, who had a song with Linkin Park. So it was all Linkin Park fans gonna be, and it's advertised by MTV, and we were opening up for it a few months after 9/11.
Wow.
In the middle of this, controversy. And I had band members that are like, I know you're gonna say something again, because they were already against the bombing of Afghanistan. I know it, and we're gonna get shot. I'm not going with you. So I had to get subs in the band, right? They're like, we might get killed. And sure enough, we were because we were touring places like Montana, Utah, Texas, Oklahoma, Florida, Ohio, all these places that we were told you see on the news, and everybody's like, bomb Afghanistan, right? And so I even thought, okay, I'm gonna be coming up against some, pushback. But at every show, I'd stop the music, and I'd read a statement from a friend of mine, Jeremy Glick, whose father had died in 9/11, and I'd say that there should be no bombing of Afghanistan and no war for oil in our name. And the reaction I got was
Nothing.
more of an uproar of applause than that. At every single place, in Texas, in Montana, in Arizona, because the truth was is that people weren't for going to war.
Right.
You know, no matter how they felt about 9/11 and who they thought did it and all that kind of stuff, people weren't for going to war. But the media was all about the media is all about telling you that you are the most radical person in the room, or you are the most radical person you know. So mitigate the things you might say. Mitigate what you might ask for or want or try to build for. And the thing is that, you know, we happen to be in a place where we're able to be, we're able to say, like, no, people are much more radical than that. Right. So we're at a different time. However, we need that organization. Right. We need, people are, you know, especially young radicals are afraid of organization, and are resistant to it. I can't, you know, one thing I did learn though in Occupy Oakland, because I came into it as like, I've been doing this, right, in my head. And there were a lot of things that were done that I wouldn't have, you know, I went along with because there's people doing it, people involved, and I want people to be involved with stuff. But I didn't think it was going to work. You know, one of them was, you know, something that happened, and we had gotten, like, a guy that was in the military had gotten shot by the police with a canister. So all of these, the media from all over the world were in town, and that's when we had a 3,000 people General Assembly, and everybody was like, let's strike, let's call for a general strike in 1 week. And from me being involved in stuff, I was like, okay, we're just making a statement. Nothing is gonna happen in that week, but sure, let's do it. You know, but I was very skeptical. And 50,000 people came out, and it shut down the port, and they came out under a banner of death to capitalism, right? And it was definitely much more, it wasn't exactly a general strike, but it was a pretty big thing. And my point is that I realize we get trapped in these ideas of what we think will work, because we've been building a body of knowledge, and that's important, that's scientific to do that. But the one thing that anarchists taught me, of which I'm not an anarchist, but the one thing that they taught me was, like, sometimes you don't know what the fuck is going to happen. Right. And you can push for something, and you can, sometimes we're not recognizing the new time that we're in, and we're not, you know, taking advantage of that. And I think, and so I think that new time is that people are wanting these ideas. There's a mandate out there. So in art, it's there. Like, there, you know, I do meet with other film companies and production companies, and they say, like, 1/3 of the proposals for a while are like, it's kind of like Sorry to Bother You, right? So the point is but the thing is that we have to have movements and organizations that are building something with a foreseeable victory. Right? And I think that has to be, I think that, as I've always said, that I don't think, you know, elections are enough, and I don't think elections are the thing that changes power. If you have a movement, if you have a movement, if we can build a mass militant radical labor movement, which is very possible right now, that can withhold labor, that can stop profit, then we can control the puppeteers, right? And those puppeteers will make the puppets dance however we want them to, right? And if we don't have a movement like that, then everything that you could possibly gain from an election is going to dwindle away.
Exactly.
The base of power under capitalism, you know, is capital. We have control of that capital if we're organized.
Right.
And And so also the danger is that there is kind of a new labor movement sparkling up, but if it becomes just a trade union movement, that won't be enough power either. People are, the average everyday person is inspired by a radical vision right now.
Right.
They want something that says that what I'm doing, you want me to be involved in your movement, I want to know how it's part of the big story.
Right. No, and I agree with you totally. I also wonder, because I've heard this from other people, how do we reconcile the fact that everywhere you went, you got enormous support for an anti-war position. I guess it was February 2003, many people in this room, in fact, were out in the streets protesting the U.S. invasion of Iraq.
Yeah.
The biggest anti-war protest in the history.
Millions of people.
Right, millions. And then we have this sort of radical insurgency. It's very clear, it's dynamic, it's mass. And here we are having this conversation under the Trump regime. How do we get there? In other words, so many of the movements that emerged, bubbled. 2011 was a dynamic moment around the world. And now we have a world where right-wing authoritarianism is becoming dominant. Now, I'm not saying that that's the end, and I actually totally agree with the anarchists call generative temporality. That is, that you don't even know what's going to happen. You've got to be in it to make it happen. And I really do believe that. But I just do want to play a little bit devil's advocate. Like, how do we get here? What do we do?
Well, okay. Trying to figure out how to not be as long-winded as I really want to be.
Oh, no, you got to. This is your show, man.
No. Okay. I think that since the new left, the left has gone away from class struggle and focused on focused on spectacle. And that's had a lot of detrimental effect to what our movements are and how. And let me explain this. And I'm going to be very general here, and whatever. But I'm going to essentialize. But in the 20s and 30s, you had, according to the documentary Seeing Red, you had in the 20s and 30s, you had 1 million card-carrying communists altogether, right? At the same time, you had militant strikes going on in Colorado and Alabama, Montana. You had at that same time, and some of those strikes were involving shootouts between, corporate hired guards and the workers.
Right.
You had at the same time in the Midwest, you had workers occupying factories. You had on the West Coast, you had the longshoremen who were thought of to be unorganizable, thought of to be less skilled than custodians, thought of to be less organizable because they're at like all of these different sites and there's a high turnover. They were getting you get fired every couple weeks or whatever. That was unorganizable. They were having a militant strike up and down the West Coast that involved the militia coming out and fighting them, and they were successful in that. You had at that same time, but unrelated, you had the bonus march happening where veterans of World War I hadn't got their bonus checks yet, and they marched, some of them armed, on the White House. Right. And were met by General McCarthy. That's when he started getting famous, because he met them with tanks. Right? Now, it was in that milieu, and mind you, there were revolutions happening all over the world, but in that milieu that we actually got the New Deal. It wasn't because people were like, we got to put all our effort into getting FDR in. It was because there was something that could have turned into a real revolutionary movement. It was that big, it was that widespread, and it was that radical. At that time, the FBI thought of Alabama and Utah as hotbeds of communist activity.
Well, they were.
Yeah, they were.
Right.
Those states that are now red, their grandparents were actually red.
Right. That's right.
And so it was in that milieu that happened. Now, soon after that, you had what was called the United Front Against Fascism. And what that meant internationally, obviously, many of you know, was the Soviet Union, UK, and US joining together to get rid of Hitler. What that meant for radicals in the US has come down from the Comintern was, while the US is fighting Hitler, they can't be afraid of a revolution happening in the US while the military is away. So the answer to that was the biggest radical organization in the United States was the Communist Party USA, went underground. So during that movement before, not only was it militant where you had these strikes, but the leaders of it were calling for revolution. We're saying this is part of a larger revolutionary movement, which I think is part of what made them more popular, right? So now all of a sudden, these radicals were not radical anymore. They weren't revolutionary anymore. They were progressive. And they didn't tell you who they were all the way. And this was in the 40s. Mm-hmm. So,
and they suspended the party at some point.
Yeah, and so a few years later, you have the McCarthy era, right, where they could point at those same people and say, that person's a radical, that person's a revolutionary, that person's a communist. And they have been lying to you. And that part could be true, mm-hmm, right? Where had it been 12 years before, they'd be like, I know. They were telling me about revolution as they were helping me get my, move my furniture back in while the cops were moving it out, right? Or when we did that work stoppage, these things like that. So because of that, and because of the non-action or non-critique because of that, and because of non-action and non-critique from revelations about Stalin, Communist Party broke up into all these little organizations in the 50s, which soon in the 60s became the beginning of the New Left. And the New Left, again, I'm essentializing everything, but the New Left took on a new tact. They weren't going to be like the previous period before. They were like, fuck you, I'm a revolutionary, fuck you, I'm a communist, fuck you, I'm a radical, right? The thing is that they focused on cities and universities. And what you can't do, a strike at a university is not the same as a strike at a factory. It doesn't have the same relationship to power. And so it became in the 60s about getting people onto the street. Mm-hmm. Whereas in the 20s, they were getting people on the street. They'd have 20s and 30s, they'd have demonstrations of 10, 20, 30,000 people, different things like that. But the difference was it was an actual demonstration of something. It was a demonstration of power. It was like, these 10,000 people that work in your industry are going to shut it down tomorrow unless you do this, right? It was connected to an actual material point of power. Starting in the 60s, it became spectacle, getting people into the street. And I'm a child of that way of thinking, to where I've been part of demonstrations and we'll have 10, 20,000 people out, be part of something, and the new people are like, yeah, what next? Right. And we're like, I don't know. Lift your voice. Let your voice be heard. And in that way, we are also selling folks an incorrect idea of how power works, right? We're telling people that all you have to do is let it be known that you don't like this. You know, like maybe if we get millions of people out on the street, we can stop the Iraq war.
Right, and of course it doesn't do it.
It doesn't do it because that's not how power works. Power is related to capital, and the people have the power to shut that down, and that's what it responds to. But I'll say that since the '60s, a lot of what we've been focusing on has been, you know, with that new tact where it hasn't been about class struggle. Again, I said I'm essentializing. There are definitely examples in the '60s where some of those students were like, we're going to go
into the factories.
Yeah, we're going to go into the factories. We're going to do that. But this is for the most part. And we have our idea of what a movement is. When we say a movement, we all picture different things based on what we've read about, what we've seen on TV, what we've seen around us recently. And so the left doesn't have a base of power. The right does. It's the same thing with the music, with the groups with the African medallions. They don't have a material base in power, but the people singing about selling dope, there's a material base of power right there. So the right wing has the capitalist class and capitalism to back them up, and the way capitalism works right now. And we need to have, you know, that movement to back up anything we're doing. But one of the other ways that it went from people in the street is that first thing, we got millions of people in the street, turned into a pro-Kerry movement. Right? Turned into a pro-Kerry movement. And you had folks like that were my friends, like independentvoter.org or whatever. They had pamphlets out lying to people saying Bush is for war, Kerry is against war. As a way to get the anti-war movement to support Kerry, right? And the thing is that that's what happens in elections is you have to sell it as this person is the be-all, end-all. It'd be different if like this person fits into our overall plan in this way. But we're selling things as in that's what happens and that changes. Then anti-war movement dissipated for years and then came back up again just in time for electing Obama. My family was very involved in the Obama movement. The arguments we'd have would be like, we're creating this network of people. And it was definitely a grassroots network. There was a lot of good people on the ground, like doing stuff in phone banks and, and canvassing. Day after the election, it's over with. Right? Because this person is the be-all, end-all.
And who they elect, someone who's also supporting war.
Yeah. So anybody that you're electing, you're going to, exactly. Nobody was a lot of people that had spent all that time organizing to get him in didn't want to say anything. But, because he was the be-all, end-all. Now, the thing is that if you have a movement that can shut down industry, you can make any politician do what you want them to do. If you feel that getting somebody in there that's more aligned with those thoughts in the first place will help, that's cool. But the selling it like that's the end, that's the thing that kills the movements that we need.
Right. Yeah, no, definitely. We got 1 minute and 26 seconds left. So, because we could talk about this all night. There's so many things.
Yeah.
Even the issue about socialism really deserves a real discussion because there are people who, as you know, would support socialism but not class struggle. In other words, socialism in their vision is simply a kind of...
Well, that's because they don't understand the fact that class struggle is going to be going on, whether we have a militant labor movement or not.
But if you think
it's just we're going to lose
as just the New Deal, restoring the New Deal without the racist policies, then that's not socialism, and that's part of the issue. What does it mean to have power? working people's power. Anyway, so that's
Yeah.
that's for another conversation. So
I mean, you could just point to France, where they've got a lot of the stuff that is being claimed to be really radical. Here, they've got that, and they still need a revolution, right?
yes,
Or any of those countries in Europe. So far be it from me to say, obviously, these are reforms that would lift the burden off of everyone.
Absolutely.
Right? But the question is, how do we go for more?
okay. So last question, just to be short. People, of course, are dying to know what's next. Are we talking about a film, Equisapiens in Power? Free all the worry-free inmates, problem socialist transformation. And of course, you don't have to say too much because, of course, I know you're trying to keep some stuff in your pocket.
I'm writing I won't talk about the content of them, but I have deals in place for I'm making a TV show, a pilot that I just finished, and I'm writing 3 features, but none of them it's not an extension of the same story. After waiting all this time and making movies in my 40s, I have a lot of ideas backed up. So doing those, and then also hoping to help other radical filmmakers get their movies made, and hoping to, in a local sense in the Bay Area, help keep that film movement going. That's happening, that's starting there. But yeah, that's the idea, is to make more radical films, to find other filmmakers and help them get their films made. And I think, basically bring back the Hollywood 10.
Right. I heard that. Well, before we give Boots one more final thank you, 2 things. One is, don't leave without getting his book. It's back
And
there.
don't leave without, they've got
some.
a bunch of Robin D.G. Kelley books out there that
and you can get that too. And
are
also,
very well, they're not only, written well in the academic sense, because that's boring, but they're good to read. They're written beautifully. There's a few writers that can do that can pull that off.
Well, we're gonna collaborate on a movie one day, as it's gonna happen. And at one point, Boots is gonna put my wife, Lisa Gay Hamilton, in one of his movies. So, anyway, thanks again.
All right. Thank you for having me.